I kind of had two questions. First is kind of a real basic one, because you are probably preaching to the choir here. And what I've always wondered is, because I'm by trade, by profession, I'm a healthcare professional, how do you get this message to the population that isn't here today? And I'm talking about the typical person working every day, trying to make ends meet, picking up their kids at daycare, getting a fast food in a single-use plastic item. How do you reach out this, get this message to them and help people who don't have a lot of funds to buy bamboo utensils and bamboo products and things like that? Because it's not that this part of the population is not interested in that, but they're not sure how to do that. Maybe they don't hear the message. So that's the part of this whole puzzle that I've always felt motivated to work on.
Yeah. So I feel like this is going to sound maybe silly, but, and it's partially because I'm a millennial. But the thing is, people are spending a lot of time on social media, and I think a lot of the stuff that you get on social media is not useful and is kind of a waste of the time, a lot of the time. But social media is a really great tool for community building, as well as for sharing useful information with folks. And so that's why I choose to have a platform on social media to talk about zero waste. And specifically, like I said, I try not to encourage people to buy things that they don't necessarily need to go zero waste, because the reality is that a lot of low-income families are already practicing zero waste as a method of existence. So like reusing Tupperware or reusing any container as Tupperware instead of buying Tupperware is something that a lot of low-income families are doing, and yet we, like in the zero waste movement, promote buying stainless steel reusable Tupperware things that cost a bunch of money when any yogurt tub will do just fine. So I think by putting the information out there where people are already seeking information is really helpful, and that's why I think that sharing your story, whenever you get the chance, whether it's with your family, your like Easter get-together or whatever, or if it's tabling at your local farmer's market or putting up flyers at your local grocery store, any way that you can get information out is really useful, and just putting it where it's accessible to folks and where they're already finding information is super useful.
And I think one thing to keep in mind too about plastics, the big distinction between plastics and climate change is that there's not a whole group of people that are plastics deniers. I think people recognize it's a problem. It's out there. It's right in their front yard sometimes. And now that it's becoming more and more known that we're actually probably breathing and ingesting it, I think that's going to be a real game changer in terms of people's attitudes. It's just a matter of talking to people and getting the word out there. So social media, I think, is a huge way to spread the word and help people understand what's going on and what might be done about it. Another question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, if I could add just one more component to that. I mean, I think there's a split within the environmental community around tactics between individual action and policy action. And individual action is important, but it is not a substitute for pushing for policy. And the number of people in this room right now is enough to sway our county government or our city government to implement good policies. It's enough to sway our state government to implement good policies. We don't have to have 100% of people buying in. We just need the active and engaged members of the community to buy in. And I think that's a really important part of the understanding our path to solutions to these problems.
Okay, next question. And please, so we can get as many questions as possible, keep your question short and to the point.
Is there an accounting of what the cost is to the public of, our waste that we're dealing with and such, and what corporations are walking with in profit? If that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. How much is it costing for us to deal with this? And that answer is actually not known in Washington, and that is why we couldn't get that bill passed. And the study bill, the plastic packaging study bill, is going to ask those exact questions. How much, where's it going, and how much is it costing us? Those are the questions the legislators wanted, and we did not have the answers because it's not required to be reported. So we're going to hire a consultant with state money to figure this out. But that's a real, there's, you know, we have gross figures for the world, but to know in Washington how much it's costing, we don't know. Very good question.
One thing I have, with our comprehensive plan, it seems that we should have that on a county by county level of what is the financial structure of our county and what's leaving the county and what we're spending in those regards.
And we do know, you know, how much our solid waste programs cost. We do know that. But the actual other costs, like the specific costs about the plastics, the other external costs, the toxics costs, the human health toxics costs, there's all these other costs we got to get in there. There's a couple in the back.
I have a question for you, Rick. You were talking about litigation as far as with the plastics industry. What is, in your opinion, the likelihood of the success of a campaign of a massive class action lawsuit? Because this affects every single person. And I'm thinking not just a group of individuals, but possibly even groups of towns, cities, even states.
Well, the key to litigation is not whether you can sue, because someone can always sue, but whether you can actually win the suit. And the key to that is what damages you can prove. So the damages have to be economized, and unfortunately damages to fish, they don't count in the courts. It has to be damages to people. Now, I do think there's damages going on right now to, for instance, the fishing industry, to tourist areas. I think Hawaii might have been, were they the first state to pass a bag bill? Okay, well, oh, they did it by county in Hawaii. But the reason it happened in Hawaii is because they don't want bags all over their beaches. They recognize the economic problems they would face if they don't get on top of what's happening to their beaches. So I haven't researched this enough to know exactly how you would economize the damages of a suit like that. I have a feeling that now that it's becoming more and more well-known that we're all ingesting plastic, that there are going to be individual human damages that will unfortunately probably be quantifiable pretty soon. And if that happens, then class actions are going to be the least of the plastics industry's problem. But yeah, I think it's possible, but I think there's a lot of variables that still need to be figured out.
I just want to ask a question about plastics that have to do with pharmaceuticals and how big that is, the amount of plastic that contains them, but even the capsules, and how many people flush them down the toilet and throw them away because they don't want their names on them and so on, how to take care of that or address that.
Mark might be able to answer this as well. So the issue of plastic bottles that the pills come in and the plastic capsules when you actually eat a pill. There are two different issues that you brought up, both really good questions. So let's start with the first one. The plastic bottles that pills come in are so small. The problem is they're less than usually less than 3 inches in diameter, which means that they can't go to our recycling facilities. They drop down and go to the landfill. And so it's a real problem. We are working on that. That's something we got to fix. The other thing is when you take your leftover drugs to the kiosk to have it go in the medicine return system, you can put it in the bottle, or you can just take it out of the bottle and just put it in a bag and put that in. And that's what I recommend, because those are going to incinerators. And when you burn plastics, there is dioxin and things coming off. We are not happy about the incineration solution for medicine right now, but that has to do with federal drugs and all these other things. Your capsules, so when you take a capsule pill, it is plastic. There is phthalates in that. Phthalate, the chemical that I'm working on, the endocrine disruptor, and that Pat mentioned. This is a problem, and there's more and more attention coming to that. It's a small amount, but the reality is that is something that has plastics in it. I'm going to let Mark answer this. Do you know anything about medicine and what's in the plastics around it? But let me say one thing first. I have breaking news. Where's Elaine? Our lobbyist just texted me. The paint bill is on its way to the floor, which means it'll pass and go to the governor. So, yay!
As far as little plastic capsules, those are usually food grade materials. They ought not to have phthalates in them. If there's some contamination, that's certainly an issue. That's a significant production issue that should be addressed by the producers, certainly. The contents of the pharmaceuticals themselves, there is some microcrystalline cellulose, which is like eating some wood fiber or something, and that's probably not a particular problem. The issue with the plastic bottles is an interesting one. One of the good ways of dealing with plastic waste is you want to make sure you clean off like paper labels. But of course, for pharmaceutical drugs, they want those labels adhered like grim death to the plastic bottles, because they do not want those being removed and someone taking pharmaceutical drugs. So they're not so easy to remove. So that's an anti-recycling product design. There's lots of that. And over time, we need to just get smarter with that.
Question over here, question over there.
Hi, this might sound like a stupid question, but what would it involve to get a bottle bill introduced or reintroduced to Washington State? And I'm sort of amazed that Oregon passed one, because besides Portland, I think they're a pretty conservative state. So maybe we could learn something.
Well, this is definitely one I should answer, because my organization was founded by the activists who tried twice in Washington to do this in the 70s and failed. It was a voter initiative, and it failed twice after Oregon passed theirs. So we would love to do it again, but it would have to probably be a voter initiative. And with this blue-red state like we have, it's going to be tough, and millions of dollars to try to pass that. What we're finding is the environmental community right now, they're probably 10 things that they'd like to work on. But what we have chosen as a community together is to work on climate change, because that's the imperative for our generation. We have ruined that for future generations. So right now, that is the focus when we're trying to do voter initiatives. But down the line, I think a bottle bill would make a lot of sense. I could go offline and tell you all the negatives of why it's so hard to do, but well, as Rick pointed out, the industry really doesn't want us to do that. And they're trying to reverse them in other states.
I heard a while back that a Japanese scientist had discovered a way of going into these gyros and gathering up the plastic and turning it back into petroleum. Is that fake news, or did that really happen?
I guess that's another one for me. Okay, so yes, you can gather up the plastics and then make them into new things. It is a fraction, like teeny fraction of the problem. You've got to stop it at the source. So it's not fake news. Different entities are trying to do it, and they're making shirts that they're selling out of the marine debris and all that kind of thing. That's all grand and good to do, but it is not going to solve the problem. So support it for sure. Do cleanups for sure, but we have to do the systematic changes to get the stuff out in the thing. It's a fraction of what's out there is the problem. But yeah, you can do it. You can definitely recycle it.
Peter Ross asks the question, is natural fabric better? And then either I didn't hear the answer or he didn't answer it. I'm really curious, are natural fabrics going to be better in the long run?
Okay, well, let me start, and then Mark, you can do it. He actually told me stuff to tell you if that question got asked. So he said I have to leave. So if Carol, by the way, Carol Sullivan, bag champion in Skagit County, asked that question, answer the question for him. So what he would have said is this. The major companies have about 7 different factors that they're looking at in terms of looking at the impact of clothing, of textiles. So it's the pesticide use when they make it in the first place, it's the energy use, it's the transportation, et cetera, and they now have added shredding and becoming microfibers. So it's a brand new thing they've added. So the great thing is all those companies are now looking at it, and that you have to balance it for each type of thing. So it's not like a simple yes or no answer. The problem also with a natural fiber, so a lot of us probably try to wear mostly natural fibers, I do, but I don't succeed in all, is then you have the dyes in it and the things that they do to make this pretty colors. So the problem is this isn't even non-toxic entirely itself. So we need to get our clothing to just stop shedding, period. And he was answering basically kind of a more balanced answer, yes and no. Some things are better and some things are worse in terms of those factors. One could argue wool might be really good if you take wool that's not dyed, too much dyed, that would be a natural thing as well to go to instead of fleece, for example. So it sounds like he wouldn't have had a solid yes or no answer on that. And Mark, do you want to say anything about fibers?
Just one thing with things like fibers, if they're ingested, what happens to them, the toxicological effects of any of these things are not that well studied. And so to ask the question, what is better, I think it all depends on what you're weighting as what you value. So if it's human health, there might be one answer. If it's climate health, it might be a different answer.
One little thing. So I just wanted to maybe point out the obvious, but if you're trying to decide between what types of clothing to purchase, maybe what it's made out of isn't the first thing, but like if it already exists is another. So again, we're really lucky to live in Bellingham where there's so many thrift stores, and the clothing at the thrift stores is like really great. So I think the big thing is to use what we already have created. And so I don't have the privilege to, I'm a recent college graduate, so I'm very poor right now. And so I have not had the privilege to purchase from sustainable companies, really at all. And so thrifting is the only way that I've been able to purchase clothing in the last 3 or 4 years, aside from fast fashion. These pants are from my mom. And so I just wanted to point out that that's another great way to save money and not really have to worry about what your clothing is made from. Yeah.
And one last thing, I tell people totally with a straight face, don't wash your clothes so much. I mean, seriously, I used to wash everything all the time. Now I don't. You don't need to wash it so often, and it lasts longer. Your clothes last longer if you wash them less and wash in cold water. So bottom line is, don't wash your clothes very much.
Panelists, I don't have my signs with me, but this is your 9-minute warning.
Okay. Well, we actually need to close at 3:25. Yeah, 4 minutes. Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask, so for someone like myself, I find a big challenge is trying to get people on board with these types of initiatives and, get the information to them and make them care. All of you have certainly had to say these things to people that were skeptical or opposed it outright. Are there any strategies that you have experience with that helps to turn the tide of that conversation?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the heart of the. That's not really just about this issue. That's about like everything happening in our whole democracy right now, right? It strikes me that I can give an example of what I think is an opportunity to find successful common ground, and it starts with listening. So in the work that we've been doing in Whatcom County, we've run into a real barrier, not with the refinery workers who, by and large, want to see their jobs protected from the possibility that jobs will be shipped overseas with crude oil or unrefined product export. They're concerned about there's an opportunity to build a bridge there. But there is concern in the construction trades, the folks who want to build and maintain and construct new fossil fuel export or petrochemical export facilities. That's a much more difficult nut to crack. So I guess what I would say is that the important thing that's come out of those, and I would say they're still very preliminary conversations, is that there is a bunch of stuff that we agree on. And if you just argue on TV, or if you just argue in front of the county council, or you're just sending your message to your people and they're sending their message to their people, we don't ever see the stuff that we agree on. some of the best days in my job are days where I sit down with people who I thought I disagreed with on everything and find a few things that we can agree on and work together on. And that's time consuming work, and it's not always the big ticket items, but there is a lot more common ground than we would assume.
Oh, yep. I used to do a lot of mediation when I was practicing. And one of the keys to mediation is trying to find common ground, as Alex was just saying. Even a single item of common ground is a starting point for a discussion rather than an argument. And I think we all need to recognize that when we feel passionate about something, that passion sometimes leaks over into our tone and our attitude and can come across to someone who may not be so passionate as either offensive or a little scary. So, just try to think of it as, I want to have a discussion with this person and recognize that their views are valid too. Everyone has their own internal monologue, and it makes sense to them. And just because it doesn't make sense to you means they're stupid. Just they have a different life. They're different from you. And so I think it's important to recognize that. I see this in environmentalism all the time. The passion often outweighs the rationality. And every one of us is subject to that. It's something I think we all struggle with, but especially in issues like this, it's really important to keep that in mind.
So I just wanted to add something a little more personal, I guess. So I once was given the advice by a mentor that I worked for that it was not my job to change people's mind and make them want to care about zero waste or sustainability. It was my job to support people when they decided that they wanted to go zero waste or when they decided that they wanted to be a part of the change to figure out how to do that. And I think you made a great point, Alex, that we don't need everyone to want to do the work. We need some really dedicated people to participate. And so I think it's important to build relationships with people that are already on board and to bring them further into the conversation, because so many people already want to do this work and just need somebody to work with. And then also, I think too, the environmental movement struggles with shaming and guilting and making it seem like there is a wrong choice and there is a right choice. And it's not that clear. And in behavior change, shaming and guilting doesn't work to create sustainable change. If you've ever seen like diet ads don't tell you like you're fat, you should go run. Like they're like, oh, you're gonna be so happy and your life is gonna be amazing and you're gonna get a better job. But like that's not probably the reality either. But like if we marketed sustainability as like stop sucking as the straw ban, then that's like super uninspiring and kind of sounds rude. But if you were like, oh, like stainless steel straws are super sexy, like that, it works in American advertising, whether or not we like it. And so I think the way that we talk about these issues is really important, and we need to focus on being positive and inviting. And yeah, so if people don't want to listen, maybe change the way that you talk.
On that note, I think